Welcome everyone to Power Parsha Pearls. And what we're going to do today actually is look at something specific relating to the festival of Shavuot upcoming. What is the biggest nemesis in life? What is the one thing more than any other that triggers wars, breaks down relationships, alienates friends, and just causes all-round chaos? In a word, pride. How often does our pride get caught up in arguments to the point that the quarrel becomes an end in itself and we cannot untangle ourselves from the dispute? A rather innocent exchange, which begins as a simple disagreement, often escalates into a full-fledged war with literally no end in sight, to the point where sometimes even close family can have a conversation with each other that goes a little off kilter, and the next thing you know, they're not speaking to each other for the next 6 months or 5 years. Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, whose yahrzeit it is on the festival of Shavuot, shared a beautiful idea about Moses, who gave us the Torah on Shavuot. And he quotes a famous verse in Proverbs that says, just as the face we show the water is reflected back by the water, so is the heart of a human being towards another human being. Well, what does that actually mean? The Baal Shem Tov explains, when you stand by the water, you see a reflection of yourself. And that's the same reality on a simple level when it comes to our engagement with other people. The way you look at somebody else and the way you feel it towards somebody else invariably comes back at you. In other words, they sense it intuitively, they feel it, they know it, and they feel that same back to you. The same way you see your reflection in the water, that's the reality of one person's heart towards another as well. But the Baal Shem Tov takes this one critical step further. He says, when you stand by the water at a distance, you see a large reflection of yourself upon the water. But when you lower yourself down, that reflection becomes smaller. And the more one lowers oneself, the more your reflection becomes smaller and smaller until your face rests upon the very water. Where at that point, the face of the reflection meets the face of the person, and they become one. And so it is, says the Baal Shem Tov, with the heart of one person to another. When you have an inflated sense of self, you invariably evoke an equivalent response within the other. But when you humble yourself before another, you trigger a proportionate reaction as well. Indeed, the more you humble yourself, the more the other person becomes humbler as well. And when you've taken your ego out of the equation altogether, the other person's face meets your face, their heart meets your heart, and you become one. And I actually find this such an incredible teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, because he passed away, what, in 1760, 263 years ago. But this teaching, or 363 years ago, the teaching is literally cutting edge advice in terms of relationships, marriages, running corporations, arbitration, and frankly, international alliances. When we remain distant or detached from one another, it's life staring into water from a distance. When what you see is just an enlarged version of yourself, your needs, your wants, your pursuits, your agenda, your politics, and being pretty much oblivious as to the needs of the other. That's a recipe for disaster. You can't build harmony from a distance. It's only when we humble ourselves, when we climb down from our own pedestals and choose to get closer to the other, that we become attuned to their needs, their wants, their pains, their vulnerabilities, where we can better understand them, and they in turn can understand us. And frankly, that's the reality with our spouses, our children, our parents, our siblings, our employees, our partners, and our friends. When I can truly come down, when I can get out of my ego space and tune into your space, then you can come out of your ego space and we can find our unifying space. When I can free myself from the fears and the traumas and the insecurities that keep me distant and keep me aloof, I can discover the beauty and magic of relationships. And that's a very poignant point to consider when you think again about the Baal Shem Tov living a little over 260 years ago, making the observation of the interpretation of that verse, and how relevant that is every bit today as well. You know, there's an ancient custom during these days between Passover and Shavuot, where every Shabbat afternoon, we recite a chapter from Ethics of the Fathers. And it begins with the words, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, and he handed it over to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, etc., etc. In other words, the opening chapter begins with emphasizing how there was a transition through the ages by way of an unbroken chain of the Torah. But those words, they stand out. They're problematic. What it should have said was Moses received the Torah from God and gave it to Joshua and him to the elders, etc. Why does it say Moses received the Torah from Sinai? And here's a thought. If you ever look in a prayer book, in a siddur, you'll find a very small paragraph at the very end of the prayer service. Well, just before the Psalm of the day, there is the Aleinu. The Aleinu is the concluding prayer, which we cite at the end of every prayer, that is morning, afternoon, and evening. And when you look in the actual prayer book, after the Aleinu, after that final prayer to which we formally conclude each service 3 times a day, there is another small paragraph in various typefaces, above which sometimes it says, some have the custom to recite this, but it's there nonetheless in every prayer book. And it begins with the following words, Al tira, do not be afraid. Most people overlook this paragraph. Personally, I always say it, and it's worthwhile doing so when reflecting on the significance of the 3 short passages that are contained within that little paragraph. The opening 2 passages essentially tell us, never be afraid, because God is always with us. Then a 3rd passage from Isaiah, in the name of God. The Hebrew, Ve'atzikna anihu, ve'atzeva ani espol, ani asiti, ani esa, v'ani espol v'malit. What it means is, I am God, I save you, I protect you, I made you, etc. And the word ani, which means I, appears 5 times. God is saying, I am here with you. I am here with you till your old age. I will be here with you to protect you. I made you, and I will carry you, and I will deal with you, and I will handle you, etc. The most common place we see I today is on products. iPhone, iPad, iPod. In each instance, the I is always a lowercase, right? That's how Apple markets their products. You know why? Because we live in an I generation. Only ever thinking about ourselves. And that makes us lowercase personalities. The challenge is for us to become uppercase personalities, capital I's, if you will. Yes, you are an individual. God made you as such, and you are unique. But you're not here just for yourself. You're here for other people as well. God's message in that aforementioned paragraph is that we have to become uppercase personalities. Don't worry about becoming old, says God, because I am there for you. I will help you endure. I made you, so I will carry you, and I will save you. It's God emphasizing how he is there for us. Uppercase I. It's the very last line that one says at the end of prayer before leaving shul. And in our narcissistic, ego-driven, self-loving world of extreme individualism, there can be no better line with which to end the prayer and set the tone for the day. God is saying, you know what I is? I care, I help, I save, I'll be there for you, I love you. 3 times daily before stepping into the workday. And in the middle of the day, and in the evening when back at home, we need to remind ourselves to be uppercase personalities, taking other people's feelings and needs into consideration. So yes, first thing in the morning before you go to work, in the middle of the day when you're dealing with all kinds of people around you, and then in the evening before you step back into your own home, we need to remember that as a people, that's what we're all about, loving each other, caring for each other. It's not about you, it's about one another. Thus, coming back to Moses, getting the Torah from Sinai. We all know on Shavuot, we commemorate this event of the giving of the Torah at Sinai. There were any number of mountains that may have been more appropriate to give that Torah upon. Mount Moriah has a claim to fame. The temples were later situated on it. Mount Carmel has a claim. It's the famous mountain upon which Elijah had his famous showdown with the idolaters of Baal. Mount Hermon has a claim. It is the largest mountain in all of the land of Israel. But God chose on Shavuot day to give the Torah on Sinai. It's a mountain. It has its own identity. It stands tall. It asserts the I, but it's a small mountain. It has humility, thus an uppercase I. Moses himself is defined by two descriptions in the Torah, as the greatest leader that ever lived and as the most humble of all men. He was an uppercase personality. It was, I care about you. I will be there for you. Sure, Moses got the Torah from God, but the Mishnah deliberately stresses that Moses got the Torah from Sinai because of the bigger message that conveys. Ultimately, if Torah and our traditions as transmitted through the ages are to stand the test of time, if we, the current receivers of the Torah, tasked with being the next link on the chain, are to ensure the endurance of its ideals, then it's paramount we take the bigger message on board because, as in the famous words of Hillel, that's the essence of the whole Torah. The rest is mere commentary. That's what we're all about. You know, there was a man and his elderly father who fell into dispute. They were very poor. They lived in a shack, no heating. They only had one coat, and the father felt, I should wear it. I'm the frail old man, stuck all day in the house with no heat. The son felt, I should get the coat because I have to work outdoors to support the family. His father, who was being supported by him, was at least indoors, out of the frost and the wind. And they couldn't settle their dispute, so they went to the rabbi to seek his decision. Each one told the rabbi their side of the story, and the rabbi tasked them to each return in 2 days, and he would render his decision. And on the way home, the son started to think to himself, what am I doing? What sort of honor thy father is this? How can I deny my own father his coat? He's old, he's sick, he's frail. I'm young and healthy. If I get cold, I can light a fire at the work site. He should get the coat. At the same time, this father starts thinking to himself, what am I doing? My son is working hard to support me. He stands all day outdoors trying to earn a living. How can I let him do this and deny him the coat? If I get a cold, I can put on a sweater or a blanket or drink a glass of hot tea. He should get the coat. So each man now refuses to wear the coat and insists that the other wear it. Neither could convince the other. So they go back to the rabbi to ask him to rule on this new dispute. And the rabbi thought for a moment and said, you know what? I have a spare coat. Why don't I lend it to you? And then you can each have your own coat. The son looks a little perplexed. I don't mean any respect, Rabbi, but if you're going to offer your coat, why didn't you offer it the first time we came here? And the rabbi replied, the first time you came, you each said, I must have the coat. So subconsciously, I intuitively felt that I must have my coat. The second time you came, you each said, I don't need the coat. I want the other one to have it. So I felt, I don't need my coat. I want the other one to have it. So now I'm happy to part with my coat. One of the top 10 Seder night songs is Dayenu. Have you ever wondered about the meaning of the stanza? If God had brought us to Mount Sinai but not given us the Torah, Dayenu, that would have been enough. Why would that have been enough? What would have been the point in taking us before a mountain with nothing to do there? But when the Jews were gathered around the mountain, the Torah says, and the Jewish nation encamped over there by the mountain, but uses the term in a singular form. And he encamped by the mountain, not and they encamped by the mountain, to emphasize the point that it was a defining moment of compelling unity. In the words of Rashi, he rested there like one individual with one heart. They stood before the all-transcendent presence of God, which negated their sense of selfhood and made them feel as one entity. Indeed, as the Medrash observes, it was the sort of unity that, alas, was never really experienced again. I've seen it around me all the time when two people, even highly educated people, argue with one another. There are times when they get so caught up in the heat of the debate that they become outright antagonistic. It's no longer about mutual respect of differences or common pursuit for the truth. It's about winning the argument regardless. What we have to seek out is harmony within diversity. It's not about silencing each other. It's not about winning or vanquishing the other, but rather getting closer to the water, getting closer to one another, hearing them as much as yourself, allowing each opinion to inform the bigger picture. Yes, if God has taken us out to just Mount Sinai, not even given us the Torah, just dispelling with our egos and experiencing that unity, that would have been enough. But as a final point, it doesn't begin and end with our fellow. There's a bold and daring biblical verse in the midst of the story of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, as we read on Shavuot. The Torah says, God would speak to Moses face to face as a man would speak to his friend. It's enough to tell me God spoke to Moses face to face. I pretty much get what that means. Why add as a man would speak to his friend? And the answer is the Torah is teaching us that the principle which applies to people or friends is also true of our man-God relationship. God is also detached from me. If I perceive him from a distance, if I allow my ego to stand in the way between me and him. But when I lower my face to the water, the reflection becomes smaller and smaller, and God, as it were, humbles himself too, to become closer and closer to me. Moses was the most humble of all men. He bent down completely to the water until the two faces became one. God would speak to Moses face to face as man would speak to his friend. Their faces touched and converged as they became one. That's what we mean when we say daily in our prayer service, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God, Hashem Echad, and he and I can become one. The separateness only exists in your perception. It's the ego or the trauma which creates the gulf. But as I humble myself to God, he humbles himself towards me until the reflection in the water reveals itself to be what it really is, namely one with my very identity. So as we go into the festival of Shavuot, reflect on that all initial egoless, prideless event. When you step into your home or your workplace or out into the world, don't be so distant, get a little closer. And those people you feel somewhat detached from, watch the magic happen. And in your spiritual life too, connect more deeply with your soul, peel away the inflated layers of selfhood, and come to discover who you really are. That's a task that we should all endeavor to take that lesson into our lives. May you all have a Shabbat Shalom, and going forward, indeed, a Chag Sameach, a good Yom Tov on Shavuot.